So Senator Lummis confirmed she is leaving in 2027. That's right. She is not going to be running for re-election, which is leaving many people to wonder, what does this mean for the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Initiative? Senator Lummis was one of the main advocates in the Senate pushing for the United States to buy 1 million Bitcoin. But now we've got no Senator Lummis, no Hines, and still no Bitcoin buys. It's been 9 months since President Donald Trump signed the Bitcoin Executive Order. So what is actually going to happen with the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve in America? Of course, we have a ton of source material for you guys. We have the betting markets. The betting markets aren't looking so optimistic about it either. Guys, it's going to be an incredible show. Stay tuned, and let's jump straight into the source material. So what am I talking about today, ladies and gentlemen? So let's start off with Hines. So you guys remember this a couple of weeks ago, no, a couple months ago at this point. Hines, which was the biggest Bitcoin advocate, in my opinion, other than the AI crypto czar David Sachs, in the White House. You saw him in every single interview. Every single interview, he was advocating for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, how it was going to happen, how it was an inevitability. And then a couple months into his stint at the White House, he resigned. And then shortly after, you had this like funky thing that was happening where Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent would go on legacy media and he would say, you know, like, we're really focusing on gold. There was a lot of pushback from the community, and then he kind of walked it back with the post. Anyways, it was all very suspicious. At that point, when that happened, initially we told you guys on Simply Bitcoin, we said, this is probably not a good thing for the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Initiative in the United States. And I remember shortly after he left the administration, he joined Tether, right? Which again, great Bitcoin company and spreading digital assets all around the world. But anyhow, so this was like the first alarm signal. The second alarm signal, I have a soft spot for Senator Lummis. Senator Lummis gave me my first interview with a United States senator. I had the honor and the pleasure of being able to interview her inauguration week in Washington, D.C., January of this year. And I remember I was so hyped because she was talking about the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. She was talking about how she was becoming part of the Senate Banking Committee, which is a big deal from a policy perspective to have a Bitcoiner in the Senate Banking Committee. Remember, the other side, the head of the Senate Banking Committee for the Democratic Party is Elizabeth Warren, right? So just to kind of give you an idea of how important that committee is. And Senator Lummis, over I think it was on Friday actually, she announced that she is not going to be running for re-election. To clarify, she will be doing everything in her power to continue to push on and advocate for digital assets in the United States next year. So she still has a whole year before her term expires, but she's not going to be running for re-election in 2027 moving forward. There's no way to cut this. There's no way to spin this. There's no way to make this better. This is a big loss for the Bitcoin community. She was the Bitcoin senator. She was hardcore. She had principles. I remember one of the last things she said when she's talking about the interview. She says, like, listen, this Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is one of the things that my generation could do for your generation to right the wrongs of fiat. That was one of the most powerful things she said when I got to interview her in DC. And unfortunately, she's not going to be running for re-election. I do want to thank Senator Lummis and her amazing team. Got to speak with them last week for everything that they've contributed to the Bitcoin space, the Bitcoin movement. It's been fantastic. It's been incredible that we have an advocate for Bitcoin on the upper house of the the U.S. legislative body, right? So I do want to thank Senator Lummis for her service, but this is a big hit. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm not going to try to spin it. So anyways, She says, it's an incredible honor to represent Wyoming in the U.S. Senate. And throughout my time here, Wyoming has been my one and only priority. What a blessing to serve with Senators John Barrasso and Mike Enzi when I was in the U.S. House, and with John and Representative Harriet Hagman while I've been in the Senate. We all put Wyoming first, which has cemented our cohesive working relationship. Deciding not to run for re-election represent a change of heart for me. But in the difficult, exhausting sessions weeks this fall, I've come to accept that I do not have 6 more years in me. I'm a devout legislator, but I feel like a sprinter in a marathon. The energy required doesn't match up. I'm honored to have earned the support of President Trump and to have the opportunity to work side by side with him to fight for the people of Wyoming. I look forward to continuing this partnership and throwing all my energy into bringing important legislation to his desk in 2026 and into retaining common sense Republican control of the U.S. Senate. Thank you, Wyoming. So let's do a couple of things to break down what she just said. Thing number one, the Republicans will more than likely keep the Senate next year. More than likely, they will lose the House next year as things currently stand. That's thing number two. Thing number three, the Clarity Act has a high probability of passing in Q1 or Q2 of 2026. The Clarity Act, more than the Genius Act, is actually a bigger win for our industry in terms of, again, it's in the name, regulatory clarity. And of course, when you have regulatory clarity, you have a lot of confidence from the big banks, from large institutional players to invest in digital assets, to invest in Bitcoin without fear of uncertainty, without fear of an incoming administration coming in and reversing all of the things the Trump administration did. Remember, an executive order can be reversed by a future president. Something that goes through legislation and gets passed in Congress, it's much harder to reverse. And as Senator Lummis has said many, many times, they have done all of these things in a bipartisan fashion. So it's not been all complete support from the Democratic Party, but a lot of Democrats supported the Genius Act, and a lot of Democrats will support the Clarity Act as well. So I do want to thank Senator Lummis for her service, but I'm not going to, put a cherry on top and say this is amazing news or this is fantastic. Losing Bo Hines and then losing Senator Lummis is just it's a big loss for the Bitcoin Reserve movement in the United States. You can cut that in two different ways. You could say, Nico, that's a good thing. We actually don't want more nation states acquiring Bitcoin. Or you can look at it from a more number go up perspective and say, listen, if there's not going to be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, then you're not going to see these wild price swings to the the upwards direction, because we were telling you guys this throughout the year. And there is a lot more certainty earlier on this year. That look, I said, if the United States announces a strategic Bitcoin reserve and they announce that they bought 500,000 Bitcoin or something like that, I'll tell you guys, the price of Bitcoin would probably go to $500,000 within a year, right? Because it would just create a Bitcoin arms race worldwide, right? So anyhow, let's talk about this. So the U.S. Bitcoin reserve, the poly market odds now have it at less than 1%. And just to kind of give you guys reference, right? In the beginning of the year, in March of 2025, the betting markets had it at a 77% probability that it was going to happen, right? And then when Bo Hines resigned, right, which was in August, right, you can see that it went from a 35% chance down to a 20% chance. And now with the Senator Lummis announcement, you have it at less than 1%. Now, if you are taking more of a long-term view of this, here is the betting, even though it doesn't have that much volume, but still, I love the betting markets, gives it a more The betting markets have been more accurate at predicting elections, predicting results, because again, people put money on the line. It's not just a pollster. A pollster can be compromised. They can be paid off. You know, when people put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, when they have something at stake, right, it tends to, you know, create more accurate results. Now, here are the odds currently as they stand for a U.S. national Bitcoin reserve before 2027. It's currently at 27%. So check this out. We went from 77% on March of 2025 to 2027, right? So 2026, it's all the way down to 27%. And we lost our two biggest advocates for a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the same calendar year. Hines, who again is with Tether, and you have Senator Lummis, who is announcing that she is no longer running for, you know, the United States Senate in 2027. There's no way to cut it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. I think this is a big loss for the movement. I think that, and I'll get to this. I think there's a rabbit hole here, and I'll kind of connect it with what was happening with Elon and all that stuff. There's no way to slice this. There's no way to spin this. There's no way to cut this. There's no way to reframe this. We had our two biggest advocates basically resign and announce that they're not running for office. Now, Senator Lummis is still going to have a year in office, and she's going to do her best. She's going to work. Her team is going to work on digital asset legislation. But again, as a political junkie, I'm looking at this from the outside, and what I'm seeing is, and she kind of says this in her statement. I'll pull it back up again, just so you guys could see it with me. But look, she says this in her statement. This isn't just me speculating. Decide not to run for re-election doesn't represent a change of heart for me, but in the difficult, exhausting session weeks this fall, I've come to accept that I do not have 6 more years in me. I'm a devout legislator, but I feel like a sprinter in a marathon. I feel like that line really gives the tell, right? So what I think that Senator Lummis ran into, and I think that what Hines ran into, is bureaucracy. You can call it the administrative state. You call it the deep state. I don't even call it the deep state. It's just the administrative states. It's the unelected bureaucracy that remains in power no matter who gets elected. And that unelected bureaucracy gets a tremendous amount of power and influence over United States politics because they are powered or funded by the United States Federal Reserve, right? And what we've seen this entire year is that the United States Federal Reserve has not been acting in a neutral fashion. They've been acting in a, I would say, they've been acting extremely politically. I think they've been picking sides. I think that they've tried to sabotage the Trump administration's first year, so that essentially by the time the midterms come around, he's no longer really a threat to them, right? Because once the Democrats take back in power, we know what the Democrats stand. Not all of them, but we know how the Democrats feel about Bitcoin, right? They want a central bank digital currency. They don't want Bitcoin. The Trump administration and the GOP have made it part of their official party platform that they will stand for digital assets, they'll stand for stable coins, and they'll stand for Bitcoin, and they'll stand for the right to self-custody. If you're the Federal Reserve, what do you want competition, or do you want a complete and utter monopoly, right? So I don't blame them for acting, you know, in their own interest, but that is something to be talked about. And I think what happened with Hines, and I think what happened with Senator Lummis, is that they ran into this machine that specializes in ensuring its survival, right? That's literally what this bureaucracy, this massive bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. is. You saw a glimpse of that when Elon went in there with Doge. Now Doge is officially shut down. but you saw it was a combination of the legacy media attacking what Elon was doing. And then it was a combination of, you saw it every single day on X. It was like politicians would stand in front of buildings and say, oh my God, the world's going to burn down. You know, like he's cutting all these things that shouldn't be cut, even though there were so many inefficiencies that were discovered. I mean, this was just announced the other day. The Pentagon just failed its 8th audit in a row, right? So there's no accountability whatsoever. And why would there be any accountability at all, right? So again, I think this is what Bo Hines ran into. I think that this is what Senator Lummis ran into, and I think it's utterly exhausting, right? And I think that's why Elon left. I think that's why Bo Hines left. And I think this is why Senator Lummis, she's being very clear with you guys. She's saying, listen, this is going to require a ton of energy. I want to sprint to get all of this stuff done. But I've come to realize that this is going to be a marathon, right? This is going to take a lot longer than what everybody anticipated. And of course, like it's, you know, ladies and gentlemen, this is the separation of money and state. What did you expect? Did you expect something different? Did you expect for them just to give the keys over and say, all right, guys, you found better money. Here you go. You know, go do your thing, right? No, it's going to take it was always going to take a lot longer. And I think these are the lessons that we're learning. But this is why it's so important for you to stay in the fight, next man up, right? Keep your head up. And again, get pro-Bitcoin, anti-CBDC people in Congress and positions of power. And again, that is how slowly but surely you will get the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It needs you need the political will, but we've lost the momentum. And I think that's what I want to talk about on today's intro. We've lost the momentum. We've lost the momentum bigly. And I don't think we're going to get this strategic Bitcoin reserve anytime soon. And we had the opportunity in the beginning of the year. We just didn't run fast enough to capitalize on it. That's my take on all this. And yeah, I mean, Senator Lummis, thank you for your service. Bo Hines, I think you did an incredible job as well. But that's how things stand. And that's not my opinion. The betting odds seem to agree with me as well. But anyways, now what is the bright side of all this? The bright side of all this is, again, a lot of people, or a lot of smart people were advocating for there shouldn't be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? You don't want governments to have all of this Bitcoin. Maybe from a number go up perspective, it's positive, but from Bitcoin's core mission of the separation of money and state and ending this monopoly by central banks, you actually don't want the government to hold all this Bitcoin. You actually want these initiatives to start happening on the state level, which they are happening on the state level. I think the state of Texas announced the other day that they bought $5 million worth of Bitcoin exposure. That's the type of movement that you want, right? And that's exactly what's happening, right? So the silver lining is that again, you have more time to acquire more cheap Bitcoin because inevitably governments are going to buy this. Like, this is just a delay. They're going to buy this. This is an inevitability. Bitcoin is the best money the world has ever seen by a long shot. So again, they're just going to buy it at a much higher price. I remember having an interview with Adam Back, and he was saying, like, look, like governments are just going to buy it at a much higher price than they are now. If they don't want to take advantage of $100,000 Bitcoin, $80,000 Bitcoin, they'll buy it at $500,000 Bitcoin, right? So again, from a number go up perspective, I wouldn't say it's very, very bullish news. From a kind of Bitcoin mission perspective, it's incredibly bullish news because, again, it gives you, the individual, more opportunity to acquire cheap Bitcoin and more opportunity for individuals to hold the lion's share of Bitcoin rather than institutions and governments. And that fundamentally, at the end of the day, if the Bitcoin revolution is to succeed, it's going to succeed on an individual level. It's not going to succeed by it's not going to succeed if it's driven by the institutions or if it's driven by the government. We kind of saw a glimpse of that in El Salvador. In El Salvador, you had, the launch of Bitcoin as legal tender. You had the launch of the Chivo app, but it was more top down. And what you saw is you didn't really see that much adoption. Like I applaud Nayib Bukele for making Bitcoin legal tender. I think it was a fantastic move. In a way, Bitcoin still is a form of, you could still use it as money in El Salvador, right? But that's not how you want Bitcoin adoption to happen. You want Bitcoin adoption to happen from the bottom up. Fundamentally, Bitcoin is a grassroots movement, right? So anyhow, interesting news starting it off. I don't think the strategic Bitcoin reserve is going to happen in 2025. I don't think it's going to happen in 2026. Let's see if it happens within Trump's first term. He is heavily incentivized for this to happen. He has one of the top 10 largest strategic Bitcoin reserves. Bitcoin Treasury companies. His company just announced that they bought, more Bitcoin. I think it was today or yesterday. So he's heavily incentivized for number to go up. He's heavily incentivized for Bitcoin to succeed. His kids, Eric Trump, heavily involved in the sector. They're speaking at conferences left and right. Their own company, I think it's called American Bitcoin. Again, they're heavily exposed to the markets. And the reality is this, ladies and gentlemen, 2025 was not that great of a year for Bitcoin. Year to date, it's down. I think it's like 6%. If you go back 365 days, it's down as well. So Bitcoin hasn't had a great year. Now let's see what happens in 2027 and 2026. Is it going to finally break the cycles? Are we going to have an explosive rally? Let's see. I think that's yet to be determined, but Bitcoin has never had 2 years back to back in the red. So if we end the year in this 90K, 88, 85K region, and that's what the price is in December 31st of 2025 heading into January, that would mean that all Bitcoin would need to do is go up from there, right? So that to 2026 is uncharted territory. We don't know where Bitcoin's going to end up. And I think that's the big question on everybody's minds. No one knows the answer to it. And that makes me incredibly effing bullish and excited. And the reason for that is for the first time in a long time, we have uncertainty in the markets. And you want uncertainty in the markets. You want people not to know exactly what's going to happen. Because if someone tells you that something is guaranteed to happen in the markets, usually the exact opposite tends to happen. And that's exactly what we saw this year. Everyone and their mother, we are guilty of this ourselves. We're extremely bullish on Q3 and Q4 of 2025. It's the year after the halving. It tends to go parabolic. And you know what happened? The exact opposite. It was bearish. They were the most bearish the year after the halving performances ever in Bitcoin's history. So what happened? The market did exactly the opposite of what everyone else is expecting. So what does the majority, what does the consensus think Bitcoin is going to do heading into 2026? Everyone feels bearish. Most people say, listen, the cycle is over. It's done. You had Senator Lummis announcing she's not running for re-election. You have Hines resigning. The strategic Bitcoin reserve isn't happening. It looks like the Republicans are going to lose the House. Like, everyone has this negative sentiment. They're expecting, downward, price action. And again, markets do the exact opposite. So heading into 2026, we might actually have an incredibly bullish year. But need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally not only have an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledn is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially, what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to HODL while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust.
allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you today. Simply Bitcoin viewers get 0.25% off their first loan by using the link in the video/podcast description. What are you waiting for? Head over to Ledn.io today.